It's good to be able to join you again today, and we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us for a period of Bible study. In 2 Kings chapter 5, we find a very interesting story about a man by the name of Naaman. Naaman was a general in the army of the Syrian nation, and he was a very great general, but one problem he had was that he was a leper. Of course, as we've said before, leprosy was basically a living death back in those days. It was an incurable disease that gradually got worse and worse. And of course, it could easily be passed along to everyone else. And so if you were afflicted with leprosy, then no one would have anything to do with you. You would be cut off from society. It was basically a living death. And so this was a terrible disease for a man like Naaman. But his servant girl told him that he could be healed if he went to the nation of Israel. Said there was a prophet in the nation that could heal him. And finally he went to the prophet Elisha. Elisha told him exactly what he should do, and that is go wash and dip 7 times in the river Jordan. And once he went and washed or dipped in the river Jordan 7 times, then he was immediately healed from his leprosy. I can imagine, and you can too, the great joy that must have been present in his heart as he made his way back to the Elisha to thank him for his great gift and to pay him. He had brought a lot of money and clothes with him in order to pay for the healing that he hoped to receive. And of course, I'm sure he went back. He was very willing and very glad to be able to give him something in return for the great gift that he had received. But when he went and talked to Elisha, Elisha would not take anything at all. He tried to entreat him and almost beg him to take the gift, but Elisha refused. You see, God's gift was not for sale. It was not the time to get money for something that he had done for Naaman. And so Naaman went on his way. But then we come to the second part of the story, and that is the Gehazi, the servant of Elisha. Gehazi was not like Elisha. Gehazi was a man without great compassion. We find 3 things that he failed in regards to his actions regarding Naaman. First thing was he failed the test of compassion. Notice chapter 5 in verse 20. Gehazi talked to Elisha, and he said, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, "Look, my master has spared Naaman this Syrian, while not receiving from his hand what he brought, but as the Lord lives, I will run after him and take something from him." Notice he said Elisha had spared Naaman. I can imagine to Gehazi what Elisha has done was pure folly. It was foolishness. Here was Naaman, a man with a great deal of money and power and influence and so forth, and yet here was Gehazi and Naaman. Neither one probably had very much money. And so here was a man with great money offering just give a great deal of goods to Elisha, and he turned it down. And all in return, because he had paid, or rather he had healed Naaman, then Elisha deserved this. Now that was the way Gehazi looked at it, at least. Naaman, of course, was also the hated enemy. He was an enemy of the nation of Israel. He was a leper who deserved to die. And yet Elisha had let him go without anything at all, with no sacrifice, no gift whatsoever. Indeed, he thought Elisha was too easy on Naaman. That's the way the New International Version would translate this verse. So Gehazi was going to do something about it. He was now going to run after and catch up with Naaman and get a little bit of money for himself. So he does just exactly that. He runs after Naaman, catches up with him, and then he begins to lie. He actually gives 3 lies in his short conversation with Naaman. We find the beginning in verse 22. Naaman, of course, sees him running after him, and he wants to know what is going on. He gets down from the chariot. Here was this proud man getting down from his chariot to greet this servant Gehazi. He probably never would have done that before, but now all of a sudden he's not a proud man anymore. So he gets off his chariot to meet this servant Gehazi. And Gehazi speaks to him in verse 22 and says, "All is well. My master has sent me." Well, that's lie number one. You see, Elisha, his master, had not sent him at all. This was all Gehazi's idea. But of course, he couldn't say that. He had to put it in the sense that Elisha had sent him. And so he lies first by saying, "My master has sent me." But then he continues this lie by saying, "My master has sent me," saying, "Indeed, just now 2 young men of the sons of the prophets have come to me from the mountains of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments." This is the lie number 2. He said Elisha has had a problem. Something came up, and he really needs some clothing and some money to feed some sons of the prophets who had arrived unexpectedly. And of course, Naaman was very happy to give him some money. Gehazi wasn't asking for a lot. I'm sure he wanted a lot more than this, but of course, he had to modify it to make it believable. He only asked for 1 talent of silver and 2 changes of clothes. But of course, Naaman, in his great joy that he would be able to give something to Elisha, he gives him even more. In verse 23, we find that Naaman says, "Take 2 talents of silver and 2 changes or garments." So basically, he doubles what Gehazi had asked him for. I can imagine maybe Gehazi probably thought, "Man, this is really working out better than I thought for. I wanted only a little bit, and he voluntarily gave me twice as much as what I asked for. Oh man, this is a great deal for me." But then when he goes back and arrives back to his home, we find that things begin to mess up. We find the lie number 3 is then told. Because Elisha sees him and asks him a question in verse 25, "Where did you go?" And Gehazi said, "Your servant did not go anywhere." Well, of course, that was another lie, of course. He knew that he had been, and Elisha knew where he had been. But now you find Gehazi now lying to a prophet of God. Gehazi might have thought there would be no harm in lying to a hated enemy like Naaman. But now he thought he could lie to a prophet of God and not get caught. But of course, you cannot deceive a prophet of God, because God is everywhere, and he inspires his many nations and his people to read into the hearts of mind and men. We find the same thing, basically a very similar thing, in Acts chapter 5 in Ananias and Sapphira. They tried to lie to the inspired apostle Peter. And of course, Peter also recognized that they were lying as well. You see, we cannot deceive God. We must get it out of our minds that somehow we can live lives of sin and deceive God. Gehazi tried it, and it did not work. Ananias and Sapphira tried it, and it did not work. And then we find another test that Gehazi failed, and that was the test of covetousness. He likely thought that Elisha was very foolish for turning the great gift down. Imagine the dazzling display of wealth that probably greeted Gehazi as Naaman rode down the road. And then he was greatly disappointed when all of that wealth just turned around and went right back down the same road that it came in on. He probably thought about all the good things they could do with the money. Maybe he thought he would no longer have to be a servant of Elisha, but he could be his own man. He could do what he wanted to. And he probably could reason why Elisha should have taken the money. After all, he deserved it for what he had given to Naaman. Well, why did Elisha not take the money? Well, of course, the Bible doesn't really tell us, but I think it shows that God's gift cannot be purchased with money. You see, it was not the time to profit personally from the grace of God. It was not that Elisha had done anything. Everything he had done was strictly through the grace of God. So why should Elisha then profit personally from something that he had not done? You see, Gehazi really had a love of money. Elisha did not, but Gehazi did. And the love of money often hides God. Gehazi used his religious office and his association with Elisha to get some worldly profit. Well, he might have been the first, but he definitely has not been the last. We find so many people today that are basically doing the same thing that Gehazi tried to do, and that is to sell religion. Televangelists sell salvation every day on the TV. You see that every opportunity is used to squeeze another dollar out of religion. Peter talked about it being the cloak of covetousness. People use religion as a cloak of covetousness. They're basically just covetous people. They want to get money, they want to get rich, but they're using religion as a way to do that. Gehazi, of course, was stricken with leprosy. The very thing that Elisha healed Naaman of, now Gehazi was afflicted with. He was doomed to be the lonely outcast the remainder of his days. We need to take a long look at Gehazi, because we see in Gehazi many times some same characteristics that we find in ourselves. You see, religious association cannot keep a man from sin. Here was Gehazi who had been associated daily with one of the greatest prophets in biblical history. And yet on one occasion, we find that he committed a great sin. Religious association cannot keep a man pure. Daily contact with religious matters cannot. You may think that you are a preacher, or that you read the Bible daily, or you're associated with great Christians every day. Therefore, you don't have to worry about that. You're not tempted with sin, but you can be. It doesn't matter who we are associated with. It will not necessarily keep you from sin. Yes, Gehazi got his money. He wanted money and he received his money. But the problem is he lost everything else. And now he was a terrible epitaph that said concerning Gehazi, he said that he was a leper as white as snow. Oh, that's a terrible thing to live with, isn't it? Here was Gehazi, a man who was associated with the greatest prophet in biblical history, Elisha, but through one weakness, the weakness of covetousness, he lost everything that he had. But he gained something in return, something he did not want, and that is leprosy. You know, this tells us something about us too as well. We need to be very careful what we're seeking for in this world. If we want so many people want money, they want power, they want popularity, they want all of those things. Many times they're willing to sell their soul in order to get those things. Well, you might be able to get those things, but that's all you're going to get. We're going to get something in return, and that's something we do not want, and that is an eternal punishment in hell. May we never seek to leave God for anything else. I hope that this will encourage you to continue living for God. No matter what the cost, no matter what you have to give up, continue living for God, because that makes it all worthwhile. Certainly do not be like Gehazi and try to sell your soul for a little bit of money. Thank you.